Hello and welcome to what is quite a strange video. And I'm saying it's a strange video because it's being recorded at a time when there are lots of events taking place that we haven't seen before. And of course, I'm talking about the events that have followed the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. So I thought I would record this video, one, because it raises some fundamental questions about what the role of the monarchy is and where we're going to go from here, but also because some of the events that you are seeing taking place on TV are things that you won't have witnessed before, and basically neither will anyone else. Right, so the first thing to acknowledge is that the events that have taken place in the last few days and will take place over the next few days and up to, I guess, about a year's time are really a bit strange. They sort of go back 300-400 years, and we won't have seen them before. And we won't have seen them before because basically Her Majesty the Queen has ruled this country as head of state for um, 70 years, and I've slipped up there. I shouldn't have said ruled. She's reigned over this country for 70 years. So she's the only monarch that we have known, but they're also a bit strange because they're the first time that they've ever appeared on TV. Now, you will hear a lot about an organisation called the Privy Council. Now, the Privy Council are a government organisation which we don't really hear about that often. Basically, they hold weekly meetings, and their role is to provide advice to the monarch, advice to the king or queen, on what's known as their prerogative powers. Basically, these are powers that the monarch still retains, things like being able to appoint government ministers, judges, etc. But really, the kind of powers that they have are quite limited. The next thing I should say is that you can tell who is a member of the Privy Council because they will have the title Right Honourable. You sometimes see MPs called the Right Honourable MP for X, wherever X might be, but that's only some of them. Not every MP is a member of the Privy Council. So former prime ministers, people like Gordon Brown, Tony Blair, the current Prime Minister Liz Truss, Boris Johnson, etc., are all right honourables, and they are all members of the Privy Council. Okay, so things that they have done recently is basically there has been a meeting of what's known as the Accession Council and also the proclamation of King Charles III. That's kind of their role. As I said, you won't have seen that taken place before. One, because it hasn't happened for 70 years, and two, because it has never been filmed before. So, if you did watch the meeting of the Accession Council, you'll have seen King Charles III being proclaimed king, but also at the same time he had to agree to certain things. Some of these you might think are a little bit sort of weird, and some of them kind of make sense. For example, one of the weirder things was that he had to agree to the freedom of the Church of Scotland. Now, that goes back to 1707 and the Act of Union. And when the United Kingdom of Great Britain was created, by the merging of Scotland and England, basically the monarch at the time had to agree that the Church of Scotland wouldn't be subject to any interference by royalty. King Charles has also had to accept that he would receive a sovereign grant instead of his hereditary titles or his hereditary right to the crown estate. So, for example, Windsor Castle is owned by us, but we allow the monarch to occupy it, and in turn, the monarch gives us the money that he or she receives from having those crown estates, and in turn get some money from us basically to fund their lifestyle. I should say that it's not a huge amount of cash per person. They are very well off, the royal family, and no one's denying that. But actually, when you compare their wealth to that of people like Jeff Bezos, it pales into kind of insignificance. Okay, so the next question might be, who was the Queen? Well, as you know, the Queen was someone who heredited that title, and basically she was declared Queen in 1952 on the death of her father, and the coronation took place a year later, a little over a year later, on the 2nd of June 1953. Now, the Queen at the time was 27 years old, and I should think that for people around Britain and the Commonwealth, it marked a new beginning. It was a chance to move on from the horrors of World War II. It also was the chance for many people to buy or rent their first TV. The coronation was going to be on TV for the first time, and although that might not sound much, it did demonstrate a kind of shift from the past to modernity. And again, I'm going to re-emphasize the fact that you would have to be in your kind of late 70s to remember having a different monarch on the throne. And that person was the Queen's father, King George VI, who was rather a reluctant king. He didn't actually want to be king. So, as I've sort of mentioned, the Queen's coronation represented a sense of a hope for a better future. If you look around the UK, there's kind of symbols of that. For example, in Coventry, it led to the construction of a new cathedral as a symbol of renewal and replaced the one destroyed by the Blitz. But there are other examples of where things were kind of renewed and rebuilt to kind of demonstrate how Britain was moving on from World War II. Now, whether you are a monarchist or not, and that's down to you, the Queen served this country for 70 years. To put that into perspective, the current longest serving MP, a guy who is given the title as the father of the House of Commons, is Sir Peter Bottomley. He became an MP in 1975. To put that into perspective, that was 22 years after the Queen had already started her role. So, whether you like royalty or not, the one thing that you can say is that the Queen served this country for a very, very long time. So, having assumed her role in 1952, the Queen presided over a period of intense social change. After World War II, we saw the decline of the British Empire, and we also saw Britain becoming a multicultural society. Now, this wasn't without its controversy. For example, Queen Elizabeth II was actually Queen Elizabeth I in Scotland, although they were required to call her Queen Elizabeth II. There had never been Queen Elizabeth I as a monarch of Scotland. In addition, many countries around the Commonwealth basically saw the Queen and the monarchy as kind of the heads of colonial powers and guilty of being racist, with a history of discrimination and violence. So, again, that's one of those things that she has had to deal with during her reign. So, what purpose does the monarchy actually serve? Well, I think the first thing to make clear is that the UK is a constitutional monarchy, which basically means that although we have a monarch, a king or a queen, their powers aren't absolute. There are very few absolute monarchies around the world. In other words, the king or queen of the United Kingdom holds very, very little political power. Instead, they're the head of state with, as I say, limited powers to interfere in politics, and that's because Parliament is regarded as sovereign. Basically, Parliament is the organisation in the UK that can create and rescind laws. So, one of the questions we might have is, well, really, what's the point of the monarch if they can't really do a lot? Well, I think one of the first things that I should say is that on Tuesday, only a couple of days before she died, the Queen met with her 15th Prime Minister, Liz Truss. So, even at the age of 96, she was still playing an active role in the life of the country. So, just to repeat that, why have a monarch? Well, in part, it's tradition, but also it offers a sense of stability. As we've seen, prime ministers come and go over recent years. That's kind of fairly regular stuff. But the Queen has always been there. So, in some ways, and this is a phrase that has been referred to, she's kind of like the nation's grandmother. She's that sort of figure that you might not necessarily pay much attention to, but seems to be a constant in your life. It should also be said that the Queen, although apolitical, did get involved in politics. She had a weekly conversation with the Prime Minister, and she also gave royal assent permission to create new laws, appoint ministers and judges. And during this time as monarch, she's also had to adapt to kind of the changes in society. One of the things that's appeared on TV quite a lot is the sketch that she did during her Platinum Jubilee celebrations with Paddington Bear. Now, I guess that most of us are at an age where Paddington Bear isn't really of much interest, but things like that really showed how the monarchy had changed. They'd become a little bit more, I don't know, playful. Maybe they had become a little bit more modern, and maybe wanted to see that they were kind of integrating in society far more than they had done previously. When you go back and look at the monarchy 100 or so years ago, they really didn't have much to do with the public if they could avoid it, because they regarded themselves as a kind of separate institution. That has had to change. The Queen's also played a role in the Commonwealth. So, for 56 countries and 2.5 billion people around the world, the Queen represented a link with Britain and was celebrated every year, every 4 years, I should say, by the Commonwealth Games. Now, some people have seen that as a bit kind of anachronistic. The Commonwealth Games has been criticised for being a bit like a kind of pound shop Olympics, and the Commonwealth is sometimes seen as a bit kind of old fashioned, a symbol of the past. The Queen was also head of state to 15 countries, including the UK, and some of those included Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. Now, it's very likely that with the death of the Queen, these countries are likely to call into question whether or not they should continue that relationship. After all, King Charles III being King of Australia in some ways, does it make sense? I don't know. You can think about that. So, what next? Well, the Queen's son, Prince Charles, has become King Charles III, as you know. There'll be a state funeral which is scheduled to take place on September the 19th, and in turn, there'll be a coronation when that's organised. Should say that we're the only European country where coronations still take place. However, it's also going to lead to wider changes. With the Queen's death, society will change, and the role of the monarchy will have to change. As people and commentators have said, the second Elizabethan era is now at an end. So, what's King Charles likely to do? Well, I think the first thing he's going to do is slim the monarchy down and to adopt a more modern approach. He's going to probably turn to monarchies which you see overseas in countries in Scandinavia, for example. He also has to accept that he cannot be as political as he once was. You're probably not familiar with this, but previously he sent a series of letters called the Black Spider Memos to politicians, which basically kind of gave his views on the environment and things like that. And it was seen as interfering with politics. He won't be able to do that. In places like Scotland, it's likely to result in a strengthened call for independence and a demand for a new independence referendum. Previously, Nicola Sturgeon, the leader of the Scottish National Party, said that whilst the Queen was living, she would remain Queen of Scotland. Now that that's changed, will they still want a monarch? For those countries such as Australia, where the king remains their head of state, there'll probably also be a call to end this relationship. So finally, how should we remember the Queen? Well, I think probably in the words that she uttered on her 21st birthday, which were, "I declare before you all that my whole life whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service. And I think that there is one thing that we can all agree on, whether we are a royalist or not, that over the course of her long life, the Queen did dedicate it to serving the country. Not always without criticism, but I think that she did do a kind of honest job in what she set out to achieve all those years ago.